Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be discussing some culture and the violence against women, and I will add a trigger warning to this video as it may not be for everybody. I will be discussing a few different topics. I can't just say which one will trigger somebody and which ones won't because it's kind of random. But it does have mention of honor killings and payments for brides and a few different things in that area. So if that is something that will trigger you, please just skip this video and go to the next one. But this is something that has to be talked about. It is a part of the violence culture, the whole society, the systems behind it. So with that said, I will just begin. In all societies, there are cultural institutions, beliefs, and practices that undermine women's autonomy and contribute to gender-based violence. Certain marriage practices, for example, can disadvantage women and girls, especially where customs such as dowry and bride wealth have been corrupted by Western consumer culture. In recent years, for example, dowry has become an expected part of marriage transaction in some countries, with future husbands demanding ever-increasing dowry both before and after marriage. Dowry demands can escalate into harassment, threats, and abuse. In extreme cases, the woman is killed or driven to suicide, freeing the husband to pursue another marriage, as well as another dowry. Elsewhere, husbands are expected to pay bride's worth to compensate the bride's family for their loss of labor in her natal home. In parts of Africa and Asia, this exchange has likewise become commercialized, with inflated bride wealth leaving many men with the impression that they have purchased a wife. In a recent survey in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa, 82% of women said it is culturally accepted that if a man pays lobola, aka bride's wealth, for his wife, it means that he owns her. Some 72% of women themselves agreed with this statement. Both marriage traditions undermine the ability of women to escape abusive relationships. For example, parents on the Indian subcontinent are reluctant to allow their daughters to return home for fear of having to pay a second dowry, whereas in bride's wealth cultures, women's parents must repay the man if their daughter leaves the marriage. As an abused woman in India stated, "One often feels like running away from it all. But where does one go?" she asked. "The only place is your parents' house, but they will always try to send you back." Cultural attitudes towards female chastity and male honor also serve to justify violence against women and to increase its consequences. In parts of Latin America and the Near East, a man's honor is often linked to the sexual purity of the women in his family. If a woman is defiled sexually, either through rape or by engaging voluntarily in sex outside of marriage, she disgraces the honor of her family. For example, in some Arab societies, the only way to cleanse the family honor is to kill the offending woman or girl. A study of female homicide in Alexandria, Egypt, found 47% of all women killed were murdered by a relative after they had been raped. At a recent conference in Jordan, experts from Arab countries estimated that At least several hundred Arab women die each year as a result of honor killings. Culture is neither static nor monolithic. However, women's rights activists argue that communities must dismantle those aspects of culture that oppress women while preserving what is good. In the words of Ghanaian lawyer Rosemary, a culture that teaches male mastery and domination over women must be altered. Women on the forefront of women's human rights movements point out that appeals to culture are often an excuse to justify practices oppressive to women. Sudanese physician Nahid Touya asks, why is it only when women want to bring about change for their own benefit that cultural and custom become sacred and unchangeable? Although culture can aggravate women's vulnerability, it can also serve as a creative resource for intervention. Many traditional cultures have mechanisms such as public shaming or community healing that can be mobilized as resources to confront abuse. Activists in Canada's Yukon Territory, for example, have developed circle sentencing, an updated version of traditional sanctioning and healing practices of the Canadian Aboriginal people. Within the circle, crime victims, offenders, justice, and social service personnel, as well as community residents, listen to the victim's story and deliberate about how best to restore justice to the victim and the community. Sentencing often includes reparation, community service, jail time, treatment requirements, and community healing rituals. Activists in India and Bangladesh likewise have accepted the Salish, a traditional system of local justice to address domestic violence. For example, when a woman is beaten, the West Bengali NGO sends a female organizer to the village to consult with the individuals and families involved. The organizer then facilitates the Salish, attempting to steer the discussion in a pro-woman direction. Collectively, the community arrives at the proposed solution, which is formalized in writing and monitored by a local committee. So, this is just different things that, you hear about stuff like this, but you don't think it's real. You can't put it into your head on how a family can pay a man or how a family can accept money from a man to marry their young daughter. But then if she is abused and wants to return home, they have to pay the man back. That's almost like a horror movie, in all honesty. And a part of that, since it is discussing other countries and stuff, I will go ahead and go into the forced sexual initiation part of this, since there's already a trigger warning on this video anyway. For a substantial minority of women, sexual initiation is a traumatic occurrence accompanied by force and fear. For others, sexual initiation, although not physically forced, is nonetheless unwanted, an experience they perceive as happening to them rather than as something they choose. For example, at an antenatal clinic in the outskirts of Cape Town, South Africa, 32% of 191 teen mothers whose average age was 16 reported that their first intercourse had been forced. Some 72% reported having had sex against their will at some point, and 11% said that they had been raped. 78% said they would be beaten if they refused sex. 39% feared being laughed at, and 6% said they would lose their friends. Some 58% said their sexual partner had beaten them 10 or more times. Also, in a study in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, the reasons that young girls most often gave for beginning sex was being forced by a partner at 28%, followed by peer pressure at 20%. Adolescent boys admit that coercion of female partners is common. In Kenya, for example, boys ages 12 to 14 and 15 to 19 in focus groups discussions said, "We seduce them at first, but if they remain adamant, we force them," including sometimes drugging them or gagging them to prevent screams. During focus group discussions in South Africa, one teenage girl said, "I actually think forced sex is the norm. It is the way people interact sexually." The younger a woman is at the first sexual intercourse, the more likely that sex is forced. In New Zealand, for example, one girl in every 4 who had intercourse before age 14 reported that she was forced to do so, often by a much older man. Likewise, in the USA, 24% of those who had intercourse before age 14 reported having been forced. Even when first intercourse takes place within marriage, it can be traumatic, especially where women and girls are given little information about sex. A study among married women in a poor community of India reported that many women found their first sexual experience to be traumatic. Only 18% had even a vague idea of what to expect on their wedding night. One woman recalled, "It was a terrifying experience. When I tried to resist, he pinned my arms above my head." Girls who are married off at a young age are especially vulnerable. Although the practice of child marriage is declining, many young girls still are married, off unwillingly, often to men many years older. Intercourse at a young age, even when culturally supported, can be traumatic for girls. For example, when anthropologist Mary Hegland interviewed Iranian women living in the USA about their sexual initiation in Iran, many recounted graphic stories of forced defloration. Often relatives held a girl down while the man forced himself on her. The interviewed woman used terms like rape and torture to describe their experience, but said the word rape would never be applied to these experiences in Iran because the sex took place within marriage. It's a lot to think about, isn't it?